Malik Nabers just turned 22 last week. So happy birthday to Malik Nabers. And it brings to mind that he was able to do as a rookie with the New York Giants last year at 21 years old is just something incredible. And so as we're getting ready for 2025 fantasy football leagues, it's time to start getting our ducks in a row. Make sure that you go to rosterwatch.com, download the ultimate draft cheat sheet. You follow the three simple rules at the top of the sheet of paper. An expert quality draft is always guaranteed. It's magical, it's mystical, it's mythical. You can use the QR code there or go to rosterwatch.com, download the ultimate draft cheat sheet. Should you take Malik Nabers before you take Amon-Ra St. Brown or Puka Nacua is the question. And I think all three come with small question marks. They're all three locked in as first-round picks, but they're going in that same tier of players. And people are wondering how they kind of stack up. To me, it's, I prefer Malik Nabers. I think that there are a lot of things that you can point to as to why. So let's just start out with the fact that, say, in 2024, if you're just to look at the number of times that these guys busted for you, where they just got you a complete bust of a game, right? In PPR leagues, I consider that to be 10 points, less than 10 points. If you don't give me double digits in PPR, you might be losing the week for me, especially as one of my frontline guys. Malik Nabers was best of any wide receiver in all of fantasy last year as far as his bust rate in PPR at 6.66%. He simply did not turn in stinker weeks for you. Amon-Ra St. Brown was really good in that category as well last year, 8.11%. Puka Nacua was sitting at 19.35% as far as his bust rate. So all those really, really good bust rates. I mean, if you consider the fact that Jamar Chase was just leaps and bounds ahead of any other wide receiver last season as the wide receiver one, he was still sitting at almost a 25% bust rate once out of every 4 games over the course of, and that for Jamar Chase, of course, would have been over the course of the last 2 seasons. But once out of every 4 games, the guy gets you less than 10 points if we look at the 2-year sample for him. And I should say that was a 2-year sample as well for Puka Nacua. Of course, we only have the 1-year sample so far for Malik Nabers, but it was an incredible year. I know that there are worries about Malik Nabers. There's been talk about how he's managing the toe that he dealt with at LSU and that he dealt with through the whole historic rookie season last year, by the way. And now there's the shoulder. But here's the thing. They say that he's being held back with the shoulder. He's got the toe. They're managing all this stuff. And then you turn on, you go and look on X and you just wonder to yourself, okay, like do the Giants have the worst corners I've ever seen? Or is Russell Wilson just dropping bombs to Malik Nabers over and over and over and over again? It's every highlight. And I know we can't get too dragged into, what we see at training camp. Luckily, I think we're going to have somebody, hopefully Can't Miss Mitch is going to be able to make it back up to Giants camp this year to get another look at it. But he was the one who came on last year, told us, guys, I mean, Malik Nabers was our wide receiver 1 last year over Marvin Harrison, all the rest. And Mitch was saying, man, we gotta move in on this, dude. We got to get it on in this big because he's going to get peppered with volume. And so last year was a little bit easier to get Malik Nabers, where you just locked him in the 3rd round of your fantasy football drafts, and you were able to get him. He's more expensive now. He's probably not going to fall past the 8th or the 10th pick in your draft. But if you're worried about the injury risk with him, there are things you can worry about with the guys who are going right alongside him. Amon-Ra St. Brown loses his offensive coordinator, right? He's like Ben Johnson's gone. I know that it's a great team they have in Detroit, great set of players, great head coach, great general manager. They've done a really good job there, but it's gonna be a slight difference in scheme, and it's not like one of these situations where they were able to, like they've done at Tampa Bay, where they go from Dave Canales, and under him was Liam Cohen, right? And now with Liam Cohen, like the system has stayed the same for 3 years in a row, right? It's just been the coordinators have moved up. Well, it didn't really necessarily happen that way in Detroit. When Aaron Glenn leaves, he takes the passing game coordinator with him. They go and they pick up the passing game coordinator from the Broncos, who admittedly did a good job with Bo Nix, but he's going to be doing some things differently. It's just you got to admit that, like, there's if you're thinking about this thing with Malik Nabers, if you're worried about a toe, and you can be worried about it, um, he was able to manage it last year. He's managing it right now, looking like a dominant force. I think you can probably worry as much about Ben Johnson. With Puka Nakua, how can you not worry a little bit about Devontae Adams coming on there? I know he had Puka. I know Puka had Cooper Cup to deal with last year, um, but there are questions about whether Cooper Cup is on the tail end of his career, whether he's starting to look rel- relatively washed. I do think that you could have those same questions about Devontae Adams, but if you watched Devontae Adams last year, he looked pretty fast to me. He looked pretty good to me playing with Aaron Rodgers there down the stretch. Um, so they're going to be worries and things things you can talk yourself off of with a lot of these guys. The thing that's hard to talk yourself off of with Malik Nabers is just about how he lapped the field and all the most important metrics, dude. Like if you look at so in actual fantasy points per game last year, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Puka Nakua were slightly ahead of Malik Nabers, right? So Malik Nabers 18.2 fantasy points per game, Amon-Ra 18.7, Puka Nakua 18.8. But if you look at the expected fantasy points per game, Malik Nabers was ahead of even Jamar Chase as the clear number one, 20.3 expected fantasy points per game. So he was in a spot where he was getting the opportunity, he was getting the volume. Like, just look at the volume. There's all these different things that you can look at, and you can say, man, with a guy as talented as Nabers, right? If you look at, say, fantasypoints.com, I always reference their first read percentage, the highest first read percentage of anybody in the whole league last year. He was his quarterback's first read 42.8% of the time, ahead of A.J. Brown at 42.1, Drake London at 35.4, Devontae Adams at 35.1, Puka Nakua down at 34.8, Jamar Chase 34.5. These are stud players, man. And Malik Nabers is way ahead of them in that important category that they've identified there that I'm a giant fan of referencing. Um, as far as looking at other things, just like boring old things like targets per game, led the league 11.1 targets per game last year, led the league in target percentage at 32.2% target share, was third in the league as far as his air yard share at 46.1%. And remember, you think to yourself, all right, well, all that stuff, but still, I'm on Ross St. Brown, Puka Nakua, these guys sort of in his tier there in the first round. They did technically score more fantasy points for him. And Alex, here's the problem. I don't get points in my league for expected fantasy points. And I get it. I understand it. It can be frustrating sometimes whenever these guys are put in these kinds of positions and they don't live up to the opportunity that has been afforded them, right? But what we have to remember is that targets are earned. It's not like this is something where it's just like this guy's bad and just because he got all these targets and things like this, it's not um, it's not something where we can say, okay, we're gonna now say that this guy is just completely volume based, all the rest of this stuff. Because the thing is, if he wasn't so good at separating, if he wasn't such a dynamic change of direction guy, if he wasn't just such an absolute dynamo, he wouldn't be earning that many targets. Especially given the fact that the only threats for targets on that offense, they haven't gone out and gotten anybody. They're bringing back Wan'Dale Robinson and Darius Slayton, and other than that, it's like Jalen Hyatt. They have guys on that roster competing for the wide receiver 4 or 5 spot, like Amir Smith-Marset. They don't have a tight end of consequence. They have a couple of nice pass catching backs, but I mean, does that really going to bother you as far as Nabers? And then just consider, you can say like, all right, well, his quarterback situation is going to stink with Russell Wilson. And to that, I would say, is it really going to stink worse than the first, 10 games of the season with Daniel Jones, who now goes to the Indianapolis Colts and who looks like he's not even going to win a job over Anthony Richardson? And then after him, Tommy Cutlets, who's doing commercials for the local sub shop, and Drew Lock. And he didn't have it. Like, all those guys are bad quarterbacks. They're all bad quarterbacks. And even if even if you look at it and you look at his fantasy points per game with those quarterbacks, it didn't change. It's like what with the Drew Lock stuff, he was at like 21 fantasy points per game, at 18.3 fantasy points per game with Tommy DeVito, around 17.45 with Daniel Jones for the majority of the season. He actually did better with the backup quarterbacks. Russell Wilson, say what you will about him, he's been able to have his wide receivers produce. And it's not like he's always shown a tendency to lock on to one wide receiver, right? There were stretches when he was in Seattle where it was like Doug Baldwin was leaps and bounds ahead of everybody else. There was like take last season, for example, with Pittsburgh. Clearly that was a situation where George Pickens, as far as his targets, were way ahead of everybody else. But I do think in this kind of thing, this feels Pickensy to me. He's got an elite target here who he's going to lock on to. He's going to throw it to. And if what we've seen in camp is any indication, it's going to be a big year for Malik Nabers, even if it's not a big year for the Giants, because, man, if they're playing from behind, you know what they're going to be doing. They're going to be saying, man, get the ball in the hands of our best guy. Can we just get Malik the football and see what he does, right? Whereas, who knows, man? What if the Rams and the Lions are always front running? And what if those other issues? New offensive system for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Jameson Williams coming along for another step forward and possibly taking more targets. A possible Sam Laporta third-year bounce back. And then with the Rams, I think that the Devontae Adams thing is enough to scare you just as much as the rest. And so when I look at it, man, give me the 22-year-old stud that broke fantasy football last year and who's a complete volume monster, man. Give me Malik Nabers over either of those guys.
This is Anthony Richardson. You're listening to RosterWatch.
This is AJ Brown, and you're listening to RosterWatch.
This is Josh Allen, and you're listening to RosterWatch.